Morning and welcome to this LinkedIn Live interview. My name is Alessandro Faia. I work in EMA's Media Public Relations team. So sorry for the slight delay in starting this live. Today we will talk about antimicrobial resistance, which is one of the biggest public health issues of our time. And to do that, we have two very knowledgeable guests from EMA, Stefan Tirstrup, Chief Medical Officer. Welcome, Stefan.
Thank you.
And then we have Anastasia Pickford, who's the project manager of EMA's antimicrobial sales and use platform, and we'll hear more about that. Welcome, Anastasia.
Thank you. Good morning.
So, as I said, antimicrobial resistance is a very important public health issue. We are 1 week away from the European Antibiotic Awareness Day, which will be on the 18th of November, so next Monday. That day also there will be the start of the World Antimicrobial Awareness Week, which is let's say an event of the WHO. So before we start our live and go and talk a little bit more in depth about this issue, just want to remind you that the structure is the usual one. So we'll first have a discussion between the three of us. After that, we will address your questions. You can post your questions in the comment section. So we will try to address as many of them in the second part of this live. So first, I will start with Anastasia. I was wondering if you could give us a brief definition of what antimicrobial resistance is.
Of course. So antimicrobial resistance happens when microorganisms such as bacteria, parasites, viruses no longer respond to antimicrobial medicines, for example, antibiotics. And so this is a natural thing that happens because pathogens undergo genetic changes. But the problem is that antimicrobial resistance is being accelerated because of the misuse of antimicrobial medicines. And this is what is leading to increased illness and death rates.
And Stefan, to you, I would ask, at EMA, we always talk about antimicrobial resistance as a phenomenon, as an issue that needs to be tackled under the One Health umbrella. So can you maybe explain to our viewers what we mean by that?
Thank you for that question and good morning, everybody. So One Health is a little bit a tricky concept to understand, but it is the acknowledging that there is a close interlinked interplay between human health, public health, and the health of animals, both wild animals and domesticated animals, and then the environment, and environment in the biggest thinkable definition, so wastewater, natural waters, climate changes. And changes in one or more of these parameters will impact the health of all the parts in it, and in particular the human health. And I think antimicrobial resistance is just one of the examples of the One Health initiative.
And it's often referred to also in the media. I mean, we ourselves refer to as the silent pandemic sometimes. But I would not like to give the idea that this is not a pressing concern. So this is a massive health issue. And what can we do? What can we concretely do in our respective roles? I mean, the patient, the healthcare professional, but also the EU institutions, the global institutions. What can we do to concretely to address this issue?
You alluded it to yourself. EMA cannot solve this problem by ourselves, and not even the 5 agencies in Europe that works together. That's the Chemical Agency, the European Centre for Disease Control, the European Environmental Agency, the European Medicines Agency, and the European Food Safety Agency. Not only the 5 of us can solve the problem, but we are key to do things here. But there are a lot of things needed to move forward with trying to curb antimicrobial resistance. First of all, we need new antibiotics. We can come back to discussing how and when and if and how this is going to be done. Then we need to think about alternatives to antibiotics. That could be macrophages we can discuss. More widespread use of vaccines could be another one. And then we need to think about what we could call better use of antibiotics, or maybe more appropriate use of antibiotic, rational use of antibiotic, better use of data on antibiotics. That's what Anastasia can talk about much more in details. and stewardship and point of care diagnostic as a third example.
And so to stay on the point of the new antimicrobials or antibiotics, so we know that the pipeline has been drying up. So EMA approved 32 antimicrobials in the last 10 years, but there wasn't any significant innovation in this field, and this is something that we hear a lot. Can you talk a little bit about the challenges of bringing a new antimicrobial to the market?
First of all, there is definitely scientific challenges here. So finding the way, the molecular mechanisms to target bacteria or vira that are developing resistant. That's one thing. So that's a technical challenge. But there is a much bigger challenge that lays beyond what EMA is dealing with, namely the market for these products. So the market that is going to pay for these products. So if you as a developer develops a new antibiotics and put it on the market, that product will be, if not shelved, but at least put to the very rare situations where we have patients suffering from an infection with a resistant bacteria. So the business case where we normally pay per cure is not working for new antibiotics to curb antimicrobial resistance.
So we need to move, let's say, there's probably a need to move towards a different model, different approach. But we also have tools for developers, let's say doors that they can knock on, regardless of the stage that they're in their development.
Definitely putting the financing aside, that's not something we have to do with. There are other initiatives that try to deal with this. But as a developer or a potential developer of antibiotics, there are different ways you can engage, and where we encourage developers to engage with the European Medicines Agency. Of course, we can offer scientific advice to pharmaceutical companies, but we also have dedicated academic door, so to speak, so academic developers who are working at early stages on understanding microbial resistance and how that could lead to new antibiotics. So we have an academic office to reach out to. If you are a small, medium-sized enterprise, we have a small, medium-sized enterprise office that can help as well. And we have what is called the Innovation Task Force, which is a kind of brainstorming forum where you can come with your ideas and bounce them off with us. And I will strongly encourage everyone who is dealing with trying to solve this challenge to engage with us.
And Anastasia, we do have some. We had some progress in the veterinary medicines field over recent years, which was quite significant. And it all started in 2022 with the new, veterinary legislation that was new at the time, not so new now. Can you tell us a bit about what that changed, what were the provisions, and how they impacted this field?
Of course, thank you. So AMR is definitely one of the key topics of this now not so new veterinary legislation. And the legislation sets mainly three goals regarding antimicrobial resistance. The first being to incentivize the innovation and research of new or alternative antimicrobial therapies. The second is to promote the prudent use of antimicrobials, which is one of the most important, and it ranges from ensuring that all antimicrobials are prescribed by a veterinarian, that their use is justified and based on an adequate diagnosis, that adequate guidance and warnings are in the labels and packaging, all the way to include even restricting the use of some antimicrobials so that they're only used in humans and not in veterinary medicine. And then last but not least, enhancing the collection of data on antimicrobials in animals in the EU.
And this was a key point, so enhancing the monitoring collection of data of a project that ran from 2009 to 2023, which was the ASVAC. So it was a project to monitor antimicrobial consumption. If I recall correctly, it wasn't mandatory, but it was like a voluntary project, but it had a huge impact. So can you remind us of what the impact was in this, in this case?
Yes, so the SVAC project, as you say, was a 14-year project that ran voluntarily and basically consisted in member states sending their data on sales of veterinary antimicrobials to EMA, and EMA collecting these data, analysing them and preparing an annual publication. And throughout this time period, monitoring these sales data, we found that in 2022, sales reached their lowest ever value. And this represented a decrease of almost 50% in sales since 2011 until the end of this project last year.
Okay. And now those principles have been translated or embedded in the EU regulation. So, and now we added, let's say, another wrinkle to it, which is the collection not only of data on the sales, but also on the use, and it's mandatory. And we come to the project that you're currently managing.
Yes, indeed. So now with the legislation, as you're saying, it's mandatory for member states to send to EMA their data on both sales and use of antimicrobials in animals, and for the agency to collect these data and to start publishing a new series of annual reports. And so, as you say correctly, the main difference with regards to the previous project SFAC is that we're now collecting data on the use of antimicrobials. And so what is the difference with sales? Well, for example, a product could be approved to be used in both, for example, cows and pigs. And so if we know that this product has been sold, okay, great. But with the use data, we know exactly in which species it's been used and in which quantity. So we're gaining a lot more granularity and a lot more information than we will have been previously. And so with the project that I've been managing, the ASU platform is basically a web interface, an IT system, which will facilitate the collection of these data. So member states will submit their data via this platform. And also it has a Power BI application, which enables enhanced data analytics that will help us analyze these data and to continue to monitor the sales trends and to start monitoring the use trends.
Okay, very interesting. And now, if I may put Stefan on the spot while we're here, what do we need? Are we missing, let's say, a similar project and a similar approach on the human side?
Definitely, I think we have a if not a complete blind spot, but we have a blind spot when it comes to understanding the utilization. Again, we can collect sales data. We know the volume being sold, but we don't know how many patients that they end up in and for what conditions they are being used, because there may be many different indications for certain antibiotics. And linking that also to the to microbial pattern from example ECDC. I know some member states have a very detailed possibility to do this. Not all member states have it. I think we're going to wait for the European health data space that most likely will be fully operational in 2030 or something, there 2030, where we will be able to link utilization of medicines, not only antimicrobials, diseases, and individuals' age and other characteristics on a pan-European level.
Okay, so
watch for this.
Stay tuned for that. Okay, now I want to touch upon a recent report by the WHO who that looked into the potential role of vaccines to curb AMR. And I think this is a link that maybe it's not so usual for people to make. So can you explain why is there a role?
It's actually an interesting report, and it estimates that we can, by more widespread use and appropriate use of vaccines, could reduce the number of deaths due to antimicrobial resistance with approximately 10%. So there's still 90% left to all the other means, but there is actually an idea, and maybe not only in our part of the world, but also in more less developed parts of the world, to a wider spread use of vaccines. And I think, just to give an example, I think many of you know that you and your kids have been vaccinated against tetanus and diphtheria and Haemophilus influenza, which are three major, very serious bacterial infections in everybody, and especially in childhood. And these are vaccines that protects against infection. So the more we could protect against the population getting infections, the less burden of antibiotic use there will be, and therefore we will decrease the chances of developing resistance.
And there is also like a role for vaccines to train our immune system to make it more efficient, let's say.
Yeah. But we also have a challenge in convincing the population to get vaccines, because I think COVID-19 have created a lot of discussions around vaccines. So if we as a public health body is going down the route of more widespread use of vaccines, we definitely need to have a good communication about the benefits and the risks of doing so.
Okay, now I want to ask something to Anastasia. We don't have, for the moment, we don't have any questions, but we're here, so we hope you want to contribute to this discussion, and we're here to address any questions, suggestions, comments you may have. what is the future looking like for the platform? So what is the goal, let's say, in for the next few years? So would it be something that would be also open to the public to have a look at the data, maybe reuse the data if they want?
Yes, so the future is looking very busy. So this year we finished the first year of data collection of 2023 data. All member states submitted their data, and we're now in the process of analysing it and preparing the first annual publication, which will be ready by the end of March next year. So that's the first thing on the horizon. Second thing is the implementation of ASU is following a stepwise approach. So we're starting first with the four main food-producing animals. So we're collecting use data for cows, pigs, chickens, and turkeys. And then in 2027, this is going to be increased to more food-producing species, all the way to 2030, where we'll also be collecting data on fur animals, dogs and cats. So as time goes by, the amount of data we're collecting is going to be exponential. And then last but not least, in addition to preparing this annual report, we're also going to start developing a public interactive database, let's say, which will provide public access to the data we're collecting, so that if researchers in academia, all the way to students with their school projects want to use the data we're collecting for their purposes, then the data will be there for them to use and to continue spreading the message and we're raising awareness and using these data.
Great. Thank you so much. And I see that now we have a couple of questions. So I will throw them in the in the room and let's see.
Please, yeah.
So how would you compare the threat of use of antibiotic in animals compared to the threat from overprescription in humans, for example? Probably challenging to quantify.
It's challenging, and here sitting on a Monday morning, I don't think I have the data, but I would say from a human health perspective, if we go back a few years, the sentiment was that it was the widespread use of antibiotics in farming that had an impact on human health. And recent data shows that this is not the same extent any longer. So if I put on my human medicines hat, I would be much more worried about inappropriate use of antibiotics in humans. So treating infections that are with antibiotics if they are viral infections, and maybe prescribing too low a dose or stopping the therapy too early if it's well grounded. That would be a far bigger concern for me. And you can see, as Anastasia also told, we have a list now of antibiotics that we have agreed, and it's a WHO created list, that these antibiotics are reserved for humans. So that's also a way of curbing, because we know if we start using these antibiotics in animals, we will get back to the situation in old days that you create resistance by using them in farming, and that resistance will end up affecting human health.
We have another question that I think you could address, Stefan. By the way, I didn't mention this was from Catherine Feor, health editor at Euractiv. It's on the point that we touched upon before. So on the volume and use of antibiotics and the data in humans, isn't waiting to the European health data space in 2030 quite a long time off? So if we can do it for vet medicines, what are the barriers for doing it in human?
I don't think that the barriers are many, and they are most likely technical. I completely subscribe to the argument, why wait? I believe that if we were to go down another route, would most likely take, again, also 5-6 years before we will be there. And then we would have created two systems in parallel. I think we're going to encourage those member states of Europe who already have access to these kind of data, where you can link use, amount of use, patients, conditions you've been using, to spread those data and show that by the good example. And then I think we need also, and that's maybe a little bit outside the question, I think it's important that we continue repeating prudent use of antibiotics. There are a lot of illnesses where antibiotics are not needed, and where we need both to have the general public to understand that there is not necessarily a need for antibiotics for all conditions, and we need doctors to be rational in their prescribing, so prescribing the most narrow spectrum antibiotics for the most appropriate length. And I think we can gain a lot just by iterating and spreading these very prudent use of antibiotics across Europe.
And we have a question from Bear Oman from the European Specialist Nurses Organization. And they're asking, where do you see the stewardship from nurses and competence building, but also positioning in the interprofessional context? So I think it's more about the role probably of nurses in the broader AMR stewardship.
I think there's a big role not only for nurses but for all healthcare professionals here, and we could start with simple things as promoting good hygiene in hospital environment and at home as well, but also in the bedside diagnostic, making sure that patients who are suspected of having an infection are getting the proper workup, and whether you decide whether the right antibiotics is there. So I think definitely nurses and other healthcare professionals, have a very important role to play here.
Okay, then we have another question that's more high level, maybe gives us a chance to recap what we're doing so it's about how EMA is contributing to fight AMR. Do we have any specific therapeutic areas to consider? And it comes from Shahida Mallah. Maybe we can briefly recap what we did on the veterinary medicines, and then Stefan, I give a bit of a pause.
So for sure, on the veterinary side, as we were mentioning before, very much supported by the legislation. So to continue to incentivize the research and discovery of new or alternative antimicrobial therapies. Then from our side, with our data collection, to have a better knowledge of how antimicrobials are being used across Europe and the different animal species. So this can provide data-informed, help make data-informed decisions on how to maybe develop further action plans or how to continue to raise awareness as to how these should continue to be used. And indeed, to continue promoting the prudent use of antimicrobials so that they last us longer, to make sure resistance doesn't occur.
Without, it's difficult. I'm going to repeat what Anastasia said. I think it's important to acknowledge, as I already said, EMA cannot solve antimicrobial resistance on our own. We are not the ones who develop new medicines, but we are an important player in engaging with those who develop, so that be industry, that be academia. So I think that's an important role for us to engage there in hopefully developing new antibiotics. And then we can do a lot of things in collecting data, making data available, commenting on the data, repeating the message of the importance of prudent use and so forth.
Right, so moving on to the next question. Dr. Anja Langeneckert, apologies for butchering the surname. Could you please explain how the envisaged EU pharma legislation update will incentivize antimicrobial drug development and also the voucher system? We know that there are a few things on the table. This is not something that EMA really deals with, but maybe you want to.
No, you're right. The final political discussions about the new pharmaceutical legislation for humans is ongoing, and Anja, you're right in saying that one of the proposals on the table is to create a voucher system, so where you actually, for developing medicines against resistant bacteria, you get a voucher, which you then can cash for money. You can sell it, it's preferable, which you can then use to pay for other developments. And we haven't had vouchers in the European pharma legislation before. It's well known in the US, and there are a lot of discussions, pros and cons. I don't have any fixed idea about whether it's a good or bad idea. I think it's interesting that the European Commission has proposed this as a system here, and it's yet another way of trying to see how we can fix the broken financial model around antibiotics.
The following question is about the use of AI to analyze data safely and responsibly. I guess we can comment generally on the role of AI.
That goes beyond antibiotic use. I think it's an overarching challenge for the European Medicines Agency and for our society as a whole. We are very focused on making use of artificial intelligence in an intelligent way, but also in a safe way, so we don't compromise intellectual property rights, human rights, privacy issues, and so forth. I completely agree with you, but I don't think it's really in scope here.
Okay. Then another question from Bipin Chandra Bhagat, a doctor. How can we address the economic barriers that developing countries face in implementing stricter antibiotic controls? What enforcement strategies would be most effective in countries with limited regulatory resources? Again, very broad question, probably more.
That's a very broad question, and maybe not just a question for the European Medicines Agency, but I think a WHO question to see. So there need to be, and we saw that with the vaccines during COVID-19, there is a need for some solidarity mechanism, because the rich part of the world can more easily solve the problems. But if we don't recognize that there is a need to support the third world in prudent use of antibiotics, appropriate use of vaccines, and so forth, we'll continue seeing the problem rise in those countries, and it will, to say it frankly, hit us in the back. So we need to acknowledge that fighting infections is a global battle.
Okay, now we have a questions on antibiotics sales and use in livestock from a reporter at Politico Europe. In some countries, such as Poland, sales of veterinary antibiotics have increased significantly in recent years, but the authorities often argue that this does not correspond to their overuse in farms. And they're asking, do you expect any surprises from the new data on antibiotic sales and use in livestock? Don't know if we can.
Well, for sure, we've got to take this first year's data with caution, because we're implementing a new data collection system. So it's very normal that the first years, or it takes a bit of time for trends to stabilize. So with sales, it will definitely be more stable than use, but we're expecting for the first years that use will take a while to get going. So it's hard to say at this stage, but we'll definitely be looking into it and see what we get this year.
Great. And we have another question that I think it's helpful for us to make a link to something that you already alluded to in one of your answers, Stefan. Denise Bader is asking, for some bacteria, there are alternatives to antibiotics to treat that cause illnesses. How could EMA help in their development? And I think here you were referring to bacteriophages.
Yeah, let's take just bacteriophages, but it might also be other technologies that I cannot foresee sitting here today. But definitely where EMA can help, and with potentially repeating myself a little bit, is of course to engage with those who have the brilliant ideas. And I know we've been talking to a few developers in the space of bacteriophages. It's also relevant on the veterinary side. I know that our veterinary colleagues already have a guidance out on bacteriophages that's maybe worth reading also if you develop medicines for humans. So come to us, and I think as usual, not only in antimicrobials, the earlier you come, the better. You can have an upfront discussion with us. I think we still need to find a way around developing bacteriophage libraries, which is what it's called, where you develop a certain set. And it comes very close to kind of personalized medicine, because you need to develop the bacteriophages more or less on an individual basis. So the concept is different from the traditional antibiotics that you take off the shelf and then treat all patients with.
Okay, so we have another question from Marianne Favur Ongudi. Is it possible for EMA to collaborate with developing countries to improve their surveillance data on AMR? Maybe Anastasia, I'll start with you.
Yes, so there have already been a couple of initiatives, for example, for countries who want to join the EU or other countries who are interested in how we collect data in Europe. And there have been knowledge sharing sessions on how we do things here and perhaps how that can be translated to other countries. So yes, for sure, things are happening and more things could be organized if interest is shown.
Stefan?
No, I was about to say the same. I'm pretty sure we also have a close collaboration with the WHO and so forth. That's also an opportunity. But coming forward, as Anastasia said, we are very welcoming discussions with other countries, not necessarily EU countries, that want to develop a surveillance system and how that can be done.
Okay, then I don't think we have any new questions for the moment. So I think we could move to wrapping up this this session. Maybe before we do that, I would like to ask Anastasia and Stefan if they have any. What's your take-home message for the people who were kind enough to connect to watch this live?
Okay, I can go first perhaps. So from my side, I say there are two key take-home messages. The first being that, yes, we're collecting data on antimicrobials, and there's a big tendency to compare between countries or to see who can reach zero first. And that isn't the idea. No, we're not here to promote against the use of antimicrobials, but rather promote the prudent use of antimicrobials. And the second is that knowledge is power, and that's why we're collecting all this data, to be able to get a more informed idea of how antimicrobials are used in animals across Europe, and in this way make data-informed decisions to continue raising awareness, improving action plans against antimicrobial resistance, and continue to work against this One Health problem and stopping the spread of antimicrobial resistance.
Stefan.
Well, I would say the same, of course. Data is power. Getting further on in understanding and using the One Health concept. I think the One Health concept, not only, of course, antimicrobial resistance is one way, but understanding that there is this intimate link, and what we do with animals can impact the health of humans. And also the climate changes that we are seeing in these days have an impact both on human and animal health that potentially will have to be dealt with, not only when it comes to antimicrobial resistance, but others. So data is definitely One Health is another one. And then for the development of new antibiotics and new anti-infectives, please engage with us as early as possible. We are open not only to speak to big pharma, but also academic institutions and others who are having brilliant ideas and new ways to curb antimicrobial resistance. So please contact us.
Okay, so we are closing this live. I want to thank again wonderful guests for this insightful discussion. I just want to remind you that the live, so you can rewatch the live on our LinkedIn page. The comment section will be open. So if you have other questions, other comments, if you want to share feedback or let us know what other topics you would like us to explore in future sessions, please do so, because this is very, very important for us. So thanks again for watching this live, and we will see you next time.